the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the Bible was not originally written in the English language, as shocking as that sounds. But it was written in the Hebrew language, and in the Hebrew language, the word for God in this first verse of the Bible looks something like this. If you were to spell it in English, it would look something like this, and it's pronounced Elohim. Let me hear you say Elohim. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. Now, the word for create is the word bara. Let me hear you say bara. It's this forceful, energetic word of making things out of nothing. In the beginning, Elohim barad, the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and void. The Hebrew phrase is tohu vavohu, which gives me great pleasure to say. Some translate it wild and waste. The Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. This Elohim has some sort of spirit. And then God spoke and said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good and separated the light from the dark. The light was called day, the dark was called night. And it was evening and morning the first day. So God speaks some sort of word and makes things. In verse 1, this God is some sort of creator. In verse 2, this God is some sort of spirit. And in verse 3, this God is some sort of word. This God is one, and yet this God is several. God is some sort of multiple persons, some sort of community of creativity. What a strange way to begin a very, very long book. Now, God says, "Let there be an expanse in the sky to separate the waters above from the waters below." And so God makes this expanse and calls it sky, and it separates the waters above from the waters below. And it was evening and it was morning the second day. So in this poem, right away, there's this refrain, and it was evening and morning the first day, and it was evening and morning the second day. Well, we don't say it that way. We say morning, then evening. But in this poem, which is what it is, it's evening, then morning. We'll get to that in a couple hours. Now, God said, "Let the waters be gathered to one place and let dry ground appear." These gathered waters God called seas, and this dry ground God called land. And it was evening and it was morning the third day. And then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light to the earth and to serve as signs to mark the days, the years, and the seasons." God made a greater light to govern the day, a lesser light to govern the night, and God also made stars. And God saw that it was good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the fourth day. And then God said, "Let the waters fill with teeming creatures, and let them reproduce according to their kinds." They'll figure out how. And then let the skies be filled with winged creatures, and then let them reproduce according to their kinds. And it was evening, and it was morning, the fifth day, birds and fish. And then God said, "Let there be animals, let there be livestock, let there be wild animals, let there be animals that crawl on their bellies, let there be small dogs whose owners dress them in sweaters at Christmas time." And God said, it's a little bit weird, but nevertheless, it's good. And then God said, "Let us make man and women in our image." And so God made people, and God saw that it was very good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the sixth day. And then God saw all that God had made, and God rested. Now, birds go in the sky, and fish go in water. Thank you. It's been great. The sun, moon, and stars, well, they essentially go in space, serve it to give us light and dark. Animals and humans go on land and sea. The things in day 4 fill in day 1, the things in day 5 correspond to day 2, and the things in day 6 relate to day 3. In fact, the dominant work in the first 3 days is God separates, and in the second 3 days, God fills what has previously been separated. So the days are all interconnected. Never mind the fact that the way that we measure an actual day is the movement of the sun, the moon, and the stars. And so the way that we move a day, the planets, doesn't come till day 4, which raises the question, how do you know the first 3 days are actually days? What a fascinating poem. Now, if you begin to look just another layer deeper and ask, well, are there any patterns that might tell us what it's about? Well, this word bara is kind of the driving, it's the engine of the poem. God creates, God creates. The word bara occurs in 3 different points throughout the poem, and at the last time it occurs, it repeats 3 times. It sort of jumped out to the first hearer of this poem. And this God has a 3-in-1-ness. So there is a 3 figures dominantly in the poem, which raises the question, are there any other patterns that we should be looking for? Well, the first verse in the Bible has 7 words. The second verse in the Hebrew language has 14 words, 7 times 2. The word earth occurs 21 times, 7 times 3. The 7th paragraph has 35 words, 7 times 5. The word God appears in this poem 35 times, 7 times 5. And the phrase, "it was so," occurs 7 times. And the phrase, "and God saw," occurs 7 times. There are 7s and patterns of 7s all throughout the poem. It's arranged in patterns. Now, if there's lots of 3s and there's lots of 7s, the question, of course, is, are there any 10s? If you have that kind of time on your hands. The phrase, "to make," occurs 10 times. The phrase, "according to their kinds," occurs 10 times. The phrase, "and God said," occurs 10 times, 3 times in relation to people, 7 times in relation to other creatures. And the phrase, "let there be," occurs 10 times. 3 times for things in heavens, 7 times for things on earth. You begin to think the writer had help. So the question remains, what's it about? If you've never read the Bible and you opened it up and you read this first poem, this opening stanza, and you were asked, what's it about? I assume, well, it starts with God, and it starts with God creating. There's all sorts of creating, but then it ends, "and God rested." Now there's this rhythm, there's this cadence, there's this beat to the poem. Evening, morning, and it was evening, morning, second day, evening, morning, third day. It has a certain groove to it, and yet this groove is glaringly absent. Day 7 doesn't have, and it was evening in the morning. Day 7 is just, "and then God rested." And the 7th day just kind of continues on. The rest have a definite ending. The 7th just lingers on and carries forward. I imagine if you were asked, well, what's it about? It must have something to do with God creating and God resting, and then it must have something to do with people and our role in the midst of this creation. It begins with God creating, but it ends very glaringly with God resting. And somewhere in the middle is this vast creation with humans right in the middle of it. And the universe is vast. It